All right, we'll go ahead and get started with the December Tennessee Technology Corridor Development Meeting. I believe we have a quorum. And so the first item up is approval of the minutes. I think everybody got a copy of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion for approval.
I'll make a motion to accept.
Second? Anyone?
I second.
Got it. A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. First item on the list for certificate of appropriateness is 12-A-23-TOR M. Kent Sanderson. Can we get a staff report, please?
Okay, so this case is on the Planning Commission agenda review for this week. So it also has the attached file number 12F23RZ. This is for a rezoning from Business and Technology Park with that technology overlay to planned residential up to 12 dwelling units an acre and technology overlay. It's 9.77 acres on Bob Gray Road next to Pellissippi Parkway. The PR zone at 12 dwelling units an acre is consistent with the land use classification, medium density residential and office within the Northwest County sector plan. It's also within the planned growth area. The PR zone is intended to encourage more imaginative solutions to the environmental design problems by enabling concentrated development in the less environmentally sensitive areas of the property. There's a blue line stream at the rear of the property, and the topography is pretty steep in some places. So the flexibility of the PR zone makes it an appropriate zone to consider. At a density of 12 dwelling units an acre, this could allow a maximum of 118 units to be built, which includes houses, duplexes, and multi-dwelling structures and developments. And some non-residential uses are also permitted within this zone. This area since 1983 has seen significant amount of rezonings from Business Technology Park to planned residential in the area. And the proposed PR zone at a density of 12 dwelling units an acre would be an extension of the zone from the south. So this property has a blue line stream along the southern portion, and then there's also 2.4 acres are within the hillside protection area. That recommended disturbance budget is 1.2 acres on this 9.8 acre site. Bob Gray Road is a major collector, so no traffic will be required through the residential streets to access this property. The adjacent residential subdivision just south of the property has direct access to Pellissippi Parkway via a private road. Let's see, right along here. Due to safety considerations, Ttcda has stated they would be in favor of closing the street connection to Pellissippi upon development of this property with a stub-out connection being required. So the staff recommendation is to approve the planned residential zone up to 12 dwelling units an acre with the one condition to require a stone out to Parkway Heights, the subdivision to the south, with the location and design to be approved by the Planning Commission during the development plan review.
All right.
Sure.
Thanks, Whitney, for the staff report. Any questions for staff? All right. Is there anybody here for the from the group? All right. Not having any questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
I'll make a motion to approve per staff recommendation.
Second.
I'll second.
All right. I've got a motion and approval. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, item number 2. 1-2-B-23-TOR for Tanya Burris. And can we get a staff report, please?
Yes, so this is a rezoning from Business and Technology Park with a technology overlay to the OB zone, office, medical, and related services with a technology overlay. It's 2.203 acres on Mayberry Hood Road and Dutchtown Road. And this is also going to Planning Commission on Thursday with the file number 12H23RZ. The proposed OB zone is consistent with the mixed-use special district, the Northwest County number 3, which recommends office and technology park uses in this area. The OB zone is intended to provide areas for professional and business offices and related activities that require separate buildings and building groups surrounded by landscape yards and open areas. The intent is to provide centralized compact locations where business offices, clinics, medical, and other dental offices near residential neighborhoods. This zone also allows some residential uses that are permitted within the RV zone, which includes houses, duplexes, and multi-dwelling structures and developments, as well as some non-residential uses. This area has seen a transition from commercial and industrial uses to office over the past 20 years. This OBTO was rezoned recently in 2002, and the OP zone across the street was redesignated from general commercial when the city updated their zoning ordinance. Dutchtown Road and Mayberry Hood Road are classified roads, so no traffic will be going through residential streets to access the site. Dutchtown Road was widened from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road with a turn lane and sidewalks in 2007. And the staff recommendation is to approve the OB zone because it's consistent with the sector plan and surrounding development.
All right. Thank you, Whitney. Appreciate that. Any questions or comments for staff? All right. Is there anybody here for the applicants? All right. Anything you want to say? Or?
No. It looks accurate to me.
All right. No questions, no comments? All right. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. I'll second.
And the motion is? Motion
Pass.
for approval. And I have a
Second.
second. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, item number 3, Berkeley Hall Companies. It's 12-A-23-TOS. Can we get a staff report, please?
Yes, so this is a request to install 2 double-sided yard signs for a 9-building apartment complex consisting of 216 dwelling units. The property is zoned within the Northwest County Sector Plan and is office as with Whitney's cases with the technology overlay. The property was approved for 2 driveways, one on Cornerstone Drive and another one on Murdoch. The double-sided sign base is a total of 88 square feet. The sign structure is 109.5 square feet, which is below the maximum of 300 square feet required by subdivision signs. The sign base is 12 inches deep and is made of fabricated aluminum. The sign structure is made of cultured stone veneer to match the stone on the property. And the yard sign structure is 6 feet tall with a minor portion of the arch getting to 6.5 feet above grade. Both signs are set 20 feet from the property line, and the sign structure is consistent with the materials used on apartment buildings. There are no apartment complexes in the area currently, but the signage is consistent with the signage around in apartment complexes within the area, and this does meet the Ttcda criteria for a subdivision sign, which cannot exceed 12 feet measured from the grade. And again, this is a site plan. You can see where the signs are located. They're in the red circle, and they are again in compliance with Ttcda.
All right. Thank you for the report, Naomi.
Absolutely.
All right, any questions or comments? Is anyone here from the applicant? Nope. All right. Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Would like to make a motion to approve, pending the condition that the signage meet all relevant requirements of the Knoxville zoning ordinance.
So is that per staff
Per staff recommendation.
I'll second.
All right, have a motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. All right. On to other business. I will turn it over to Michelle.
Okay, so the first other business item is the report of an administrative review. You all saw this item come before you a few months ago, originally in, November of this past year for the signage, and then before that was February for the actual building. It was April for the signage. Anyway, they have done some value engineering and made some changes to the elevations and a few changes to the landscaping, and so those all still met the requirements of Ttcda. They did not deviate significantly from the plans that was approved by this board, so we were able to issue that COA for the administrative approval. Going into that, so you can see the top is the previously approved, and then the bottom is how they value engineered. So basically, they took the wood paneling off and kind of exposed the skin beneath. So that's basically the changes that were the same to all facades. So the canopy is still there, the tower, the overall shape of the building, the size of the footprint, none of that changed. And so what they did was install additional landscaping along here. And again, these are the elevations that show that same view. And again, this is just sort of looking at it from a different angle. And they also made a few changes to the signage, and that kind of mirrors that same thing. So the wood cladding, that swoop comes off and it just kind of exposes what's going on underneath. So the same changes to there. So again, there was not a significant change. The materials, the other elements of the facade where the windows were, all that stuff, none of that changed. So we were able to approve that administratively. Do you have any questions about that one? Okay. The next item that's up before you guys is the workshop discussion. And this isn't going to require a vote today, but we do need to kind of talk about what we want. Sorry, it's my computer, but I'm getting emails. Probably should have that on silent. Anyway, so yeah, we are going to be discussing the landscaping buffers today. So originally, board member Frazier asked for a 15 and 25 foot buffer. Presumably that was going to be between industrial and residential properties and between commercial and residential properties. And thank you, Patrick, for getting us started and for presenting something that we can all kind of discuss. We do also have someone here from the county's Code and Inspections Department, administration and enforcement, Steve Elliott is here with us today. So if you guys have questions about enforcement issues or things like that, he can address, how landscapings go through the county. If y'all have questions about how they look at those things, in case any of that comes up. So thank you, Steve, for being here. So with that, I'll dive in and let's see if I have. Okay. So you guys should have your packets. Don't have all the hard copies. It would be easier just to kind of reference them that way. So there's Exhibit A here where it says proposed landscape buffer standards. If you want to dive into it, I might not be the best person to be leading this discussion since I'm not very well versed in landscaping, but I will try. We might have lots of questions for Patrick. But it says in the attempt to provide a naturally diverse and ecologically sound green screen, all buffer strips must adhere to the following guidelines. And then it talks about plant requirements, buffer strips being a minimum of 25 feet in width and planted based on the following number of plants and plant types per 50 linear feet of buffer strip. So for deciduous shade trees, 2. Okay, I really need to turn this off, I'm sorry.
Work doesn't stop.
I know, right? Okay, there we go. 3 evergreen trees for 50 feet, 1 flowering tree, and 8 large shrubs. And then they were talking about how those need to be on the recommended tree and shrub lists. Those are existing. That's the appendix of Ttcda. The VRRB, that's not something that we have in Knoxville, so we can strike that part unless there's a specific body that you all would want to review this. The city has a tree board, but the county does not have a counterpart for that. So it might be this, just that we strike it and make it be part of the recommended tree and shrub list, but planning, we don't really have an opinion either way, but up to you all how you'd like to do that.
So Steve, how does the county deal with as far as the plant material stuff?
Typically, we would like to see the species on the approval so we can just look at them, compare the 2 plans. It's very hard for us to go out and look and distinguish what species are being planted when they're in the ground if we don't have them on the plan.
Okay. Do you guys have like in the city where there's I guess it's the city with the alternative, or is that really more of a planning issue?
So the city does have an alternate path. So if you can't meet the strict interpretation or the strict adherence of the code and you want to propose something different, like maybe you can't plant the trees over here because maybe there's a super steep slope or a transformer or something like that, a sinkhole or something that would prohibit you from putting those things there. You can file something under one of the articles in that code that calls for that. So basically how it's worded is that you have to meet the intent of that. So you have to come up with something that's at least as good or better than those standards. And then that goes through the city's administrative review committee. So that's a committee that consists of city staff and planning. So from city staff, I believe it's someone with economic development, someone from engineering, someone from plans review and inspections, and then it's also city staff. So it's a group of people who kind of get together and look at their various departments and how landscaping affects their particular piece. So it's a little bit more complex. It's got the city's got a different structure that allows for that. The county doesn't really have anything like that. So if you wanted to do an alternative path, that's something we'd have to look at with what that enforcement mechanism would look like and how that would be reviewed, what the criteria for that would be.
I guess one of the things I've never really looked at what's on the list.
Of the
So I don't even, how diverse is the list?
for Ttcda. I can reconnect and pull it up. Two, I want to say that the Ttcda does have the waiver, so I don't know if you would really need an alternate path, because if there's something they couldn't meet, you could apply the waiver to allow them to deviate from that. And if you wanted to add language to that saying, waivers from the landscaping buffer can be done as long as it's as good or better, then kind of keep that language that's in that alternate path the city provides, you could certainly do that. I guess I'm going to be showing that you a little later. I can announce something.
I guess one of my things about the planning is trying to be as consistent, since we have 2 different bodies of working with the city and the county, is trying to be as consistent as possible, and trying to serve both of them equally, so we don't create situations for ourselves that we can't be in compliance either way that we go. So, because not trying to create more problems or issues for the city or the county.
Yes, and there is conflicts between the two codes that are
Yeah.
Well,
pretty
both-
significant.
Yeah, and both jurisdictions default or defer to the to Ttcda. So after this board votes, we provide the applicant with a set of stamped plans in the COA. And both of those things get included with their application for permitting. And I think the county especially is really good about if something doesn't meet the plans, they'll reach out and say, hey, planning, do you have updated plans for this? Does this meet? That sort of thing. The city has a website that they use where we can kind of go in and take a look at it and then let them know if there's something that doesn't meet. So both bodies are checking the plans to make sure that what's being submitted on the permit meets this, but they both will defer to Ttcda. They're looking for that stamped set of drawings because that overlay district takes precedence over the base zone with pretty much every respect except for, I'd say in the county, if you've got a bigger setback in some of the plan zones, then that would take precedence. So in some cases, you have zones with like a 50-foot peripheral boundary or something like that. If that's bigger than what's going on with the Ttcda side or rear, then those take precedence. But other than that, they're strictly looking for that stamp.
Thank you.
So this is what I have pulled up. It was up there a second ago. I think it was just before. So what I have pulled up now is Appendix B of the Ttcda guidelines, and that is divided into tables for the types of trees. So there's one for large, one for medium, one for small, one for evergreen. And so you can see there's quite a few trees on the large. There's the medium, not quite as big, but still a lot of trees to choose from, and small. So right now, the city and the county, one area where they defer in the landscaping plans is that the city has a specification for the diversity. So it wants a more diverse species. So in case there's something that happens, like maybe there's one of those bugs that comes through and it's tree specific or some sort of disease or something like that, it's not going to wipe out every tree on the site. So they're looking for some diversification to kind of protect the site and the trees from having something like that happen. So if there is a disease that hits, maybe it might only affect a small percentage of the trees versus everything that's there. So that's something that, because the county's ordinance is so much older than the city's, it just didn't incorporate that back in the day. So that if that's something that this board wanted to do, and planning would certainly support that. There's also species for foundation plantings, for shrubs, evergreen trees, and then it gets into the trees that are not allowed, non-native exotic plants.
Patrick, have you gone through the list since you're a resident expert?
Yeah, I've gone through the list, and it seems like a large enough palette where you can certainly come up with a lot of different designs and meet the spirit of what it's trying to do. So I do think a diversity requirement might be a good thing. And I don't know, the question is comparing it to the cities, is the cities too, I don't know, is it requiring too much diversity? And I don't really know that I have a recommendation one way or another.
So I have the cities pulled up now for reference.
Yeah, and so the way this works is if you've got to have more than 16 trees planted as a part of the requirements, then it's got to be 5 different species, and then no more than 40% can be of one type is how this reads. So part of part of coming up with this was looking around locally and trying to pull from things, so we're not using an ordinance that's from Oklahoma or something like that. So part of this did come from town of Farragut, where they're thinking a little bit differently about buffers than if you go to Exhibit B here and flip over, that's what the county has now, and it's a more regimented look. And I was just going through your questions here, which is another question of, do we want an ordinance that stipulates distances between trees, or is it more open to what the designer's trying to do? And I don't know that I have a preference one way or another. I sort of see it both ways, but where this whole discussion came about was, of course, here in Exhibit B, that's supposed to just be a 15-foot deep buffer. And during that discussion, it was Kim or somebody said, well, let's do a 25-foot buffer. But I think where that might have come from is you're thinking, well, I'm going to get more buffer. But if you only did it for this Exhibit B, you're actually spacing the trees out farther. You know what I mean? So this is just where all this discussion comes from. So I don't know how much we're going to try to accomplish in the workshop today, or what the goals are, if this is just enough to put it out there so that everybody can see it, and then we think about it, and then we come back in January and actually talk about it a little more in depth. Or
Yeah, that's sort of the process. I mean, we're kind of just opening it up for discussion, general questions, information finding, that sort of thing. So, there's additional research that I can do based on the questions that y'all have.
Sure.
So maybe we reach out to the city and ask them if they had issues with their people meeting their species requirements. I have done a few of the alternate landscape plan reviews. I did those for a time, and I would say hardly any of it that I saw was based on the diversity. We did have a few of those, but it's kind of like, how can you not really meet the diversity? You just buy different trees. It seems like, because there's so many to choose from, it seems like a simple thing to me, but maybe that's just me not having enough knowledge about availability of trees and costs and things like that, availability. That's certainly something I can talk to them about and see if they've had any feedback or pushback on that particular requirement that they have. I think regarding the 25 and the 15 feet, because it's specific on how far apart they have to be planted. I think if you wanted to do a 25 foot, maybe it's just additional rows that are staggered or something like that, maybe an option for y'all to consider. The way that this is laid out, I think it probably would be a little more organic looking, a little more natural looking, which I think is the intent of it. So that's something for you guys to consider as well. Which would you prefer, or which you think would be easier to meet? And we'll say we would probably also want to build in to this the ability of someone to preserve the existing tree buffer that's already there. So if there's an existing dense vegetation, we would provide an option for someone to keep that instead of being able, having to do this. They could have the choice, I guess, to do either one, is what I'm trying to say.
And I like that idea because, just purely from a development standpoint, you go in sometimes and, it's to get it back to the point of with that buffer, you spend a lot of time and effort going in and clearing and grubbing everything and pulling everything out, and then trying to get it back, and potentially you may not get it back for, to that condition for 20 or 25 years.
Right.
So.
Right, and I have heard too that it's kind of like where the tree cover stops. If you disturb within that shaded area, then that tree might be preserved for a time, but about a year or so later, it's probably going to die. Just in talking to different, some of the tree protection folks, that's what they said.
My experience with that is we spend a lot of money trying to save the tree, and it dies, and then when we don't spend any money trying to save the tree, it lives. So.
Murphy's Law.
Yes, very much.
Okay, so kind of getting into this a little bit further, that was A and B. So looking at C, substitutions, allows for 2 understory trees to replace 1 deciduous. or for 3 small shrubs to replace one large shrub. So again, providing some options in there to kind of work with whatever situation may be going on the ground. Then it gets into the size and the arrangement of the plant material. So it says deciduous and understory trees shall be at least 2-inch caliber at the time of planting. Evergreen trees shall be at least 8 feet tall at the time of planting. Multi-stem trees shall be at least 6 feet tall at the time of planting, and large shrubs will be at least 4 to 5 feet, with small shrubs being 2 to 3 feet at the time of planting. And then plant layout, no abutting 50-foot buffer sections shall contain the same plant configuration or arrangement, nor be mirrored. And so that kind of gets into the diagrams that are on the second page regarding the repeating layout, or whether you mirror it or have it be opposite. So, and I did have some discussion questions as part of that, just to kind of prompt things for you all. Okay, so do you guys think that having the 2 buffer depths would be better? So there would be like a different standard for industrial uses versus commercial uses, or would you rather have 1 depth suffice? And that may depend on the landscaping that you guys choose. If it's more dense, then 15 feet suffice. But if it's, right now, the way the county's is, it's very regimented, but there's also a lot of space between. So it provides some measure of separation, but it's not dense enough to where you really can't see through. Like if you're on a residential property with that buffer between, you can still see that property. And we know that plants really don't do a lot for sound attenuation. It's mostly just visual. So anything that's more dense would probably help increase that separation. So I'm not sure if the extra depth would really make that much of a difference if what we're creating is more dense anyway, if that makes sense.
What's the difference between industrial and commercial? What are we using as a?
I guess that would come down to the definitions in each zoning ordinance and what that looks like. So industrial uses are typically more like manufacturing, warehousing based, a lot of deliveries from maybe like an 18-wheeler versus a commercial that's probably a smaller development that might use a box truck. So that the sound and maybe the fumes from that. And then obviously the pace or the consistency of those deliveries. Warehousing, you're probably going to see it daily. With a commercial business, depending on what it is, you might see it once a week or so, depending on the volume of commercial activity that they're doing.
Yeah.
So again, we don't have to decide any of this stuff today. This is just kind of things for you guys to mull over. We can certainly have another workshop next month and kind of talk about, okay, this is what I heard, this is what I think we're going in. We don't have to rush. This can be as slow or as you guys want.
So whenever we got onto the discussion about this a couple months ago, one of the things, the piece of property we were looking at, it was the one that had the large slope on the back. That's the interesting thing about this from a visual standpoint. In that scenario, screening is not going to do anything.
Yeah, I think if you have slope going downward, then you probably need to plant the trees closer to the property line so that, your trees are where it's buffering down, as opposed to planting along a slope where the property adjacent is already above the tree line. So it kind of depends on that, but of course that's going to be development specific and how much room they have.
So do we have enough flexibility potentially in the system, like in that scenario, where based on the conditions that we had, to me, putting in a large row of evergreens right at the property line would have been probably the best alternative, just to hide everything, if that was the intent.
Right.
That's part of it is being able to, we want to apply the same standard, but at the same time, we don't end up with, the same conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we make adjustments? How much flexibility do we have to make adjustments? I guess that's where.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of building into the language what the intent of the landscape buffer requirement is, and then providing some guidelines around that, but maybe also putting a bullet point in there that something about the depth and where it could be located to where it's going to buffer do the most amount of buffering, for lack of a better way to say that.
I think, based on the different topography and all the different developments, I think it would probably, in my mind, it would make most sense to have some mechanism for, you have a standard, and if they can't meet it, there's some mechanism for a landscape architect to present an alternative.
Okay.
Just like in the case you're bringing up.
Yeah.
Just they're gonna know more than most people about trees and everything, so
Yeah.
let them present there should be a way for them to present an alternative, I would think.
Okay. So let's see how the city lays that out, their alternative. I'm trying to remember what section it's in here, so bear with me. Actually, I think I'll go here.
It said I should have it committed to memory, but I don't. Where in the section
It says strict application of the landscaping requirements would require unreasonable or unnecessary compliance. Such situations could include water features, topography, lot configurations, utility maintenance zones, unusual site conditions. The applicant envisions a more creative means to meet the spirit and intent of these requirements. And it goes on in here. These are sort of the criteria, so it will not present a safety hazard. Proposed alternative will, upon maturity, provide landscaping that is equal to or better than the standard requirements. The proposed alternative is designed to address plant health and vigor and is reasonably compatible with the natural and topographic features of the site. So some of that's a little bit subjective, but we could kind of take that language and incorporate that into our staff review. I don't know, Steve, if you guys have any opinions on that from the enforcement thing. I guess you're probably just looking for our stamp of COA, right? I would think.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Steve, given you've had a lot of experience related to this, if it's not necessarily, because the county's a lot larger than our little finger of the Ttcda. Whenever you guys are working with applicants, how do you, your screening process and everything and working with them, like I'm looking at berms and different things, what are people doing nowadays? What's
I think in ours it does allow for a berm to be there. It gives a height requirement, and it says either 7 feet high or like a 4-foot berm with 3 feet landscaping. So,
are you seeing a lot of that, or?
Yes. HLOR did it on their property line. They built a berm up and did put landscaping on it. Typically, though, we just see the buffer installed the way it is on the plan. One thing I would add, most of the time my guys are inspecting this is building inspectors out there. He'll look at it while he's there. So, we don't have a whole lot of expertise in the species. So that's the struggle for us is we typically count. There's supposed to be 90 plants there, 90 trees, and that's what we count. I'm not sure how the city does. I think the city may have an arborist on staff that they go out and look at. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We can find out though.
Well, I think it's important that we pass something that, if we pass something, then it needs to be something that the county's happy with.
Absolutely. Yeah, the majority of the Ttcda property is in the county. There's a very small sliver of it in the city. So
I've not heard anything here today that would alarm me. I think we could enforce anything you guys passed.
So, Michelle, just so I know, do you know off the top of your head what the zoning ordinance, the setbacks are? Or there's not offers in the zoning ordinance?
Not well. So it depends. In the city, there is one for landscaping. Let's see, which one starts?
Somebody starts asking questions, he needs to shut them down, right?
So, between a non-residential use within a residential district, it's a Class A buffer, which I'll go back and look at those. And then non-residential district abuts not a residential district, so there's a separation between the use and district versions of being adjacent. And that breaks out into Class A and Class B. And then coming up here, Class B is 20 feet, Class A is 10 feet. And then there's different requirements of shrubs and trees within there.
The county and zoning ordinance that have it.
They have what you're probably used to seeing in a lot of the staff reports that we provide like for the Planning Commission, which is up here, what's on the screen right now, should Exhibit B, the Type A screen dense. And that's 15 feet, and you have the option of either planting 2 rows of trees kind of staggered, or and those are just like evergreen trees with shrubs in the middle, or ones that go all the way down with no shrubs in the middle. So this is more like your columnar evergreens, your like Leland cypress, for example, something like that. Whereas this, the way that it's pictured and the way that it's described are a little bit different. I think the way that it's described is probably not this full all the way down, so you have like more of your traditional tree with the trunk and then the bushes across the bottom. And that's the A, and B is their lesser version. That one's 12 feet, but kind of similar. You've got, this is your berm, I guess that Steve was talking about, and then your tree with your other fence and your bush. And then your C. And so these are all different grades. This one's between parking lots and public streets. Type B is between screening, parking, and loading areas from residential and office. And A, which is the most dense, is boundaries of commercial and industrial adjoining residential. So there are same standards for both of those.
I got the sense that what this was trying to do is be even more dense than A.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's deeper, but then, so the question is, as you all look at these diagrams, is this dense enough? Is it shown? Or maybe it's not. And that's sort of where we need to take this workshop, I guess.
Yeah, I think so, because in Ttcda, most of the uses are going to be that light industrial. So lots of deliveries and those kinds of things, and people, just in and out of the site and larger vehicles, that type of thing. So kind of screening that visually from those residential properties, so they still have a measure of privacy and, sort of protecting that property line. It still feels like their oasis, I guess, instead of I live right next door to an industrial property.
So one of the questions I've got is based on kind of the sizing of the trees themselves. Whenever I'm looking at this, you're looking at it in plan view, it looks great, but on day one, when it's planted, what is it? What is the visual, what is that gonna look like, that elevation?
Maybe having an elevation of
I think so.
this would be actually more informative, probably.
Probably.
And when you're looking at it from the, you're going out to inspect it, what does this look like? You're actually, okay, yeah.
It's usually a skinny little tree that's about as tall as you are with hardly any branches.
I think about, we have this fight all the time on our projects where, the difference between a 2-inch tree versus a 3-inch tree,
Mm-hmm.
Some landscape architects will tell you a 2-inch tree will be bigger than the 3-inch tree in 5 years. It's,
Yeah.
I mean,
And what you're describing too, Kevin, is more in line with what the county is already showing, where they show the elevation and the plan. And so having the elevation is going to help, I think, help determine what this is. So maybe before the next January workshop,
I think that would be good.
we can add that, and that would bring a lot more clarity, I think.
And I think Patrick, I don't know if you got the opportunity to do this. I appreciate you taking the time to do
Oh, sure.
is, if we had day one and, I don't know if we want to say year 3 or year 5, something like that. So because there's going to be a big difference, right?
Yeah, And you would just have to say what's the expectation, year 5,
What would you typically expect in year 5? It's gonna be, we're gonna see it day 1, and then in year 5, we would expect that if it's maintained and,
Sure.
taken care of appropriately, we could have something that would look like this.
Okay, yeah,
Yes. Well, then they don't have to, but they can right now. So she's just asked if they have to bond trees. So there is, when we do allow for the bonding of trees, if someone's project is approved during a time where it's not ideal to be planting and that he's going to survive, then obviously it doesn't make sense to plant. So right now, people do have an option to provide a bond for that planting to occur. Ttcda, if you want to talk about that process a little bit.
We typically give them a option, either they can be in prior to final inspection, and if we get a CO for the building, if fire safety wasn't in, or, if weather's not permitting, plant them in the middle of August when it's 100 out, so we would give them the option of bonding, and we have I don't know what it is, but it's a per tree price, and we get a surety in place to make sure it's put in.
Thank you for doing that.
Well, the goal here is for it to survive, so, you don't put it in when the weather doesn't allow us.
And who goes back and replants those? So when does that typically occur?
Usually in the fall, there's a growing season, so we had a Dollar General just do it not long ago. They came back and planted, and we released them. So, but there's a lot of people utilize it. So.
Yeah, we've used it. We've actually used it a couple of times on our projects in the county.
Okay.
So it's a great process, just from the fact that because you're in the middle of the heat, and in a lot of these situations, you don't want to pay for irrigation on them. So if you can wait till the fall, so they'll get the fall, through the winter, and next spring before the heat comes back.
Sure. I mean, we just wanted to make sure there was like a release mechanism in place, so people weren't just posting bonds and then being like, okay, bye, and then you guys would have to come back.
No, we usually give them like a 6-month window to get it done.
Okay.
It's usually, it's in the middle of August, and they can't plant it, they come to it in September, and we release them. And I'm sorry, I gotta go to county commission, so I'm more.
You go have fun.
I can go back next month if you guys need me to.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
but I think these staff questions are great and really help get the wheels turning. And this discussion's been very helpful. And I think to everybody else, just, I don't know, just imagine if the residential, if you were living there, what would you want to see? And we can change these graphics around to whatever they need to be. So,
I have a question, and I probably should have asked when Steve was in here, but is he out inspecting newly planted stuff, or do they go back like 7 years after the things have been planted, say some of them died? Do they site them and have them replace those, or
No,
It's just the new stuff.
it's just the new stuff, and from what I'm hearing, it's the building inspector that's actually looking at it. So basically, they're taking the landscaping plan and they're saying there's supposed to be a tree here. Check, it's there.
Okay.
And then they'll kind of count the total, like in this grouping or that grouping. And I know when I've done those type of things in the past, not having any idea of what species this is or that is, I'm looking for like a different type of plant that represents this different graphic. I'm kind of doing it that way. So I'm assuming that they probably would do something similar. But usually if there's trees that have died off, somebody would probably have to report it. They're always, like that arm is kind of complaint driven. And I'm not sure what they do in that situation. I'm pretty sure that they'd be required to replant. But we can ask him next month to be sure.
Good question.
Mm-hmm. So number 3 is talking about do we want to keep screen trees as separate things? So right now, how the guidelines are with regard to yard trees and parking trees, they're 2 separate guidelines, and you can't count a tree twice. So if you count it for your parking, you can't count it for your yard, and vice versa. So I would imagine that to be consistent, we would want to also say that your screen trees would also need to be something different. So right now, for a yard, you're required to put in the 10 trees per acre of yard space. Yard space being anything that's not your parking lot, not your anything within, it's kind of just what's between the developed part and the lot line. But I can also see that we would be able to let people combine their yard trees with the screen trees. So it really just kind of depends. Would you like to have trees sort of all over the site, in which case you would want to keep them separate? Or would you want the yard trees to count as your screen as well, in which case you would just have the trees towards the rear? So that's something to be thinking about as well, if y'all have a preference.
Do we have any, is there a requirement for islands in the parking lot?
Yes.
How does that work with the yard trees?
So right now, the parking, and I might not get all of them off the top of my head, but right now you have to have one large or medium canopy tree within 60 feet of every parking space. And some of that is accomplished by islands, which you do have a requirement for how many islands you need to have. It's roughly 1 per 20 spaces is how the math kind of calculates. And then the 60 feet is approximately every 6.5, 7 spaces. And so some of that 60 feet rule, some of that's accomplished within the trees and the islands. And some of it is within, like, if you've got a parking lot with a grass perimeter and you've got islands here and one's 60 feet over, you might be able to get that within 60 feet by planting large or medium canopy tree in the perimeter just right there. And so that perimeter tree, if you're going to count it towards your parking, you can't count it towards your yard, even though it's technically in your yard. So you have to apply it to one or the other is how that works. And that's kind of.
So if we could write it in such a way that if it meets the guidelines for both, it could be counted as both.
The tree in the yard, yeah, you could rewrite those, you could amend those sections of the guidelines if you wanted to.
One of the things I think that would, because that's one of the things, I'm thinking about different developments and things that we've done. And, to put a tree, quote, in the yard, in the 8-foot grass area outside of the building, where there's a tree that's in an island that is 26 feet away. I'm not sure how I see the benefit. It's almost like we're overpopulating the area too much.
Yeah. Well, this one we wouldn't count it towards that unless it was 60 feet. So we don't really see a whole lot of, islands near the yard trees that they want to count unless they just, I do see what you're saying. But what we do is we put a 60-foot buffer around that tree, and then there's spaces that fall outside that buffer, and we're looking at, okay, where's the next one? And so that's kind of what we're looking at when we're looking at that requirement. And I can come next time with some examples of plans.
I think that would be good to be able to look at some of the plans and really talk about, some of the things that how we typically deal with those things in the past, because in my mind, it seems like we don't have a lot of buildings over the past few years. I don't remember a lot of buildings with a lot of yard.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was thinking
It's mostly been, I think, some of maybe the churches, and like maybe the multifamily, some of those have had. But yeah, I'll find some examples of ones with yard and parking lots so that you guys can see that.
I think yard parking lots, and we're hopefully maybe got screening too, where we can kind of pull that stuff up and take a look at it.
Okay.
Talk about diversity.
I didn't really get a sense from you guys one way or the other. Do we want to look at putting diversity requirements in the guidelines?
I think it'd be a good idea.
Okay.
I would agree that I agree it's a good idea. We just need to make sure that we limit it. I think the city's diversity requirements are, it can be a little bit cumbersome.
Okay. So less diversity there, but more than we have now. Okay, so I wanted to kind of check with you guys to see there that prohibition on repeating a layout. So that was in the proposal. That's that last page. Not acceptable repeating the layout. Not acceptable having a mirrored layout, and acceptable having it be different. And that's kind of that organic versus regimented. I'm kind of getting a sense from you all what you thought about that. We can come back to that next time if you guys want.
Let's come back to the next one.
Okay.
Something like that, I just think you just leave it up to the landscape architect.
Yeah, I mean, they have to have their plans have to be stamped anyway, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, for TTCA, it only is required if the site is more than 5 acres. If it's less than 5, then it can be your architect or engineer or someone else, an arborist or something that can do it. They have to be certified.
we can talk about it next time.
Absolutely. Okay, so what I can do when I'm here for next time, I'll have some examples of parking and yard trees and with screening if possible. Maybe working on a mechanism for alternative designs by landscape architects. Look at adding language that requires elevations and plan views at day 1 and year 5. And then also trying to add a tree diversity section that is provide some clarity over what we have now, but not as tight or as robust as what the city says. Okay. Anything I want to add? Okay.
Anyone? All right. Not having any other business, we will adjourn.
Thank you.